The scream of the wind sliced across the glacier like a blade. But it wasn't the wind that stopped Ranger Eli Mercer cold. It was the howl. Not the distant cry of wolves. Not the echo of avalanche warnings. A howl so human in its pain, it made Eli's heart skip. He stepped forward, ice crunching beneath his boots. His snow goggles fogged slightly, but he didn't wipe them. His eyes were locked on the figure ahead. A dog, standing at the edge of a snow-covered crevice, massive, regal, black and tan fur matted with frost. A German shepherd, gaunt, trembling and howling straight into the sky. It was the kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel it in your chest. A cry of mourning or warning. Eli froze. A canine dog. Alone. Up here? There were no other units, no reports of missing hikers, no search parties. The dog's head whipped around. His eyes locked. With Eli's, fierce, glazed with desperation. And then he backed up 2 steps, turned toward the edge of the crevice, and barked, frantic, urgent. Eli rushed forward. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "What is it?" He dropped to his knees beside the shepherd, peering into the ice, and what he saw, he would never forget. 20 feet below, a small crumpled figure, wrapped in a too thin pink coat, motionless. A little girl. Eli's breath caught in his throat. Alive, dead, he couldn't tell. But the dog of the canines barked again, louder, more desperate, leaning over the ledge as if willing himself to go down. "What the hell happened up here?" Eli whispered. His radio crackled on his shoulder, but he didn't touch it. This wasn't normal, this wasn't accidental. The dog, the child. Something had brought them here. Something dark. He reached out a cautious hand toward the shepherd. The dog flinched, then pressed his head against Eli's glove. Blood. His right ear was torn. Patches of dried blood streaked down his neck. He'd been in a fight, and yet he hadn't left the girl. Not even now. The shepherd stepped closer to Eli's side, guarding the ledge like a soldier. His body was shivering violently, but his eyes never left the child below. Eli reached for his radio. "Base, this is Ranger Mercer. I've got a situation it's bad. I've got a German Shepherd K9 and what appears to be a young female, is maybe 6 years old, down in a crevice. We need medevac, immediately." Static. Then a voice. "Say again, Mercer. A dog?" Eli looked at the shepherd. The dog was whimpering now, pacing the edge, then barking down toward the child, his voice echoing off the glacier walls. Not just any dog, a protector, a soldier, and something told Eli. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a story, a tragedy, a mystery, and the dog, he was the only witness. The helicopter blades were still chopping through the thin mountain air when Ranger Eli stood beside the stretcher. The little girl was breathing, shallow but alive, wrapped in thermal blankets. Her frostbitten fingers curled slightly when the paramedics lifted her. She hadn't spoken. Her eyes were shut, but she was alive. The dog. He wouldn't leave her side. As the medics carried the girl to the chopper, the shepherd limped behind them, teeth clenched through the pain, his eyes never leaving her. When they reached the doors, a medic raised a hand. "Dogs can't come." "But—" Eli stepped in. "He's not a dog." His voice cut like ice. "He's her guardian. He goes." The medic hesitated. One look at the shepherd's torn ears, the scars on his face, the way his body blocked anyone who got too close to the girl. They nodded. As the chopper lifted off, Eli stayed behind. The image was burned into his mind. That dog sitting. Beside the child, his head bowed, one paw resting gently against her tiny hand. He wasn't guarding. He was mourning, remembering. 4 days later, a vet technician tapped softly on the kennel door. "He's not eating," she murmured to the officer beside her. "He just lays there, watching the window." Officer Marianne Graves nodded, her arms crossed. "Did anyone figure out where he came from? No tags, no chip. But his training's advanced. He's ex-military. I'd bet my license on it." Graves knelt in front of the steel door. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, You saved that little girl, didn't you?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring at the glass, waiting. 1 week earlier, the facility was nothing more than concrete and steel buried in Wyoming woods. Canine Unit, Fort Luther. Inside, cages tightly packed clean cold, each with a name, a number. But there was one cage at the far end without a number, only a name, scratched into the rusted plate. Shadow, a young handler, stood beside the cage. "What's the story with this one?" His supervisor didn't answer right away, just stared into the dog's eyes through the bars. Shadow sat still, not barking, not moving. His eyes haunting, empty. "Shadow's special," the supervisor finally muttered. "Served 3 tours overseas, sniffed out 38 IEDs. Took shrapnel twice. Lost his handler in a blast in Syria." The rookie swallowed. "So he's retired." The man shook his head. "No, he shut down. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't work. They tried repairing him, but he bit the last trainer. Hasn't been touched since." "Why keep him locked up?" "Because when you look in his eyes, you realize he hasn't stopped serving. He's just waiting for a command." Present day, hospital room 402. The little girl hadn't spoken. Her parents never came. No one claimed her. No missing person reports matched, no leads. But every time she stirred in her sleep, her hand reached out toward the floor, where Shadow waited, curled beneath her bed. Still, protective, haunted. Graves stood outside the glass window, arms folded. "What do you see in him?" the doctor asked quietly. Graves didn't look away. "I don't know yet, but it's not just trauma. There's something else. The way he found her, the way he howled until we arrived." She hesitated. "That wasn't a coincidence." The doctor tilted his head. "Are you suggesting the dog led her there?" Graves didn't answer. "Because the truth was, it didn't make sense. Unless he'd been protecting her all along. Unless she wasn't lost, but taken. And Shadow had chased them into the mountains. And fought to keep her alive." That night, the girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time she whispered, "Shadow." The dog's head snapped up. He rose slowly and pressed his muzzle gently to her arm. She didn't flinch. She smiled, just once before falling back asleep. The room was sterile. A table, 2 chairs, 1 clipboard. The little girl sat in silence, legs dangling from the metal chair. Shadow lay beneath her feet, head resting between his paws, detective. Graves sat across from her, notepad untouched. She didn't need it. The child's eyes were empty. She'd spoken only one name since being rescued. Shadow. Graves leaned in. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl blinked slowly, then whispered, "Lila." A breath of relief escaped Graves's chest. Progress. But the tension in the room still hummed like a taut wire. Graves reached slowly into her file folder and pulled out a photo. A blurry surveillance still. A man, broad-shouldered, black coat, leading a child, possibly Lila's, into a cabin. "Do you know him?" Graves asked gently. She slid the photo across the table. Lila's hands trembled. She looked at the image, then turned her face to Shadow. The dog let out a low, almost inaudible growl. Graves tensed. She watched Lila's lip quiver. And then, quietly, "That's not my dad." Graves blinked. "I never said it was." Lila's small hands clenched into fists. "He hurt Mama. He said if I told, he'd make Shadow go away." The room fell silent. Shadow stood, his body tensed, eyes locked on the photo, teeth bare. Not in threat, but memory. Graves stared. "Shadow was with you that night?" Lila nodded slowly. "They didn't know he followed us. He was hiding, always watching. Lila was curled on a mattress in a remote cabin. She'd stopped crying hours ago. The man had left. Her mother wasn't moving. Then, a creak by the door, and suddenly, Shadow was there. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He pressed his muzzle to her cheek. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "You came back." The door burst open. The man returned, eyes wide when he saw the dog. "What the—" Shadow lunged. The fight was brutal, fast, messy. The shepherd took a blow to the head but didn't stop. Lila grabbed a coat, ran into the trees. Shadow followed, bleeding, and they never stopped running. "We've got a suspect," Graves told. "Ranger Eli across the hallway. Name's Nolan Briggs, released 2 months ago. Domestic battery, multiple counts, kidnapping. His ex was Lila's mother." Eli's face darkened. "And she didn't make it?" "No." Graves lowered her voice. "Found in the cabin. Blunt trauma. She never had a chance." A pause. "What about the dog?" Eli asked quietly. Graves shook her head. "No microchip. No military record under Shadow. But here's the thing." She opened a file. "This photo," she said, pointing to a grainy image of a military unit overseas. "That's him. Same markings, same scar above the eye. He belonged to a Sergeant Mason Holt, KIA in 2021. Eli stared. "You're telling me this dog found her? On his own?" Graves nodded slowly. "Tracked her, protected her, attacked Briggs and then survived in the snow until someone came." Eli let the silence hang, then muttered, "He's not just a dog." Shadow sat alone again. They didn't let him stay in the hospital now that Lila was in state custody, but his body faced the door, waiting, watching. A tech came in, clipboard in hand. "Poor guy," she said. "They're saying he might be too dangerous. Briggs is threatening to sue for animal assault. Can you believe that?" The other worker frowned. They wouldn't really put him down, would they? No answer. But Shadow, he heard everything. His ears twitched, his body curled tighter, like he knew that everything he had protected might still be taken away. And this time, he couldn't follow. Shadow had been silent for hours, but there was something different in the way he lay in the cage now, not like a prisoner, but like a soldier planning his next move. His ears were alert, his eyes sharp and focused, never blinking, never sleeping. Something was coming, he could feel it. Across town, Lila sat inside a temporary foster home. She hadn't touched her food. Her tiny hands stayed clasped in her lap. She didn't ask where her mother was. She didn't ask about Shadow. But in the middle of the night, she whispered his name into the darkness, over and over, like a prayer. Shadow. Shadow. Each time she said it, a tear ran down her cheek. Meanwhile, Detective Graves stood in the cold hallway outside the holding room, staring through the glass at Shadow. She didn't know why it gnawed at her, but something didn't add up. Briggs wasn't just a random abuser. The way Shadow had reacted, the way Lila clung to that dog like he was her last piece of safety, it went deeper. Graves returned to her desk, opened Shadow's case file again and flipped through the reports. One small detail caught her attention. A military tag once embedded under his skin had been removed, surgically, almost professionally. That meant someone had erased his identity on purpose. She picked up her phone and called a military contact at Fort Banner. "Do you have anything on a K-9 named Shadow? Used to serve with a Sergeant Holt?" There was a long pause. Then the voice on the other end answered, "Not on file, but off the record. Yeah, he was part of Black Echo, a covert rescue unit, not just a sniffer. This dog was trained for deep infiltration and child recovery missions. Real quiet stuff." Graves froze. "Why would a dog like that end up abandoned?" The voice replied. "Holt died in a mission gone wrong. The rest of the unit went dark. The program was shut down. Shadow disappeared from records. Some say the dog went rogue after Holt's death, wouldn't return to base, wouldn't accept a new handler." Graves closed her eyes. It all clicked. Shadow hadn't lost his purpose. He was still on assignment. Protect the child. And he'd followed that directive even when the world turned its back on him. Back at the shelter, the air shifted. A low growl echoed through the metal walls. Shadow's ears perked up. His body rose slowly. There was movement outside. Footsteps. A key turned in the lock. Then the door creaked open. It wasn't Graves. It wasn't anyone he recognized. It was Nolan Briggs, Dressed in janitor overalls, face hidden under a cap. Moving quickly, nervously, he stepped toward the cage. "You cost me everything," he snarled, "but you're not going to stop me this time." He reached for the latch. In a blink, Shadow exploded from stillness. The cage door flung open. He'd jammed the locking mechanism with his paw hours earlier. Briggs barely got his arm up before the shepherd was on him. The fight wasn't long, but it was brutal. Screams tore through the hall as workers rushed in. Briggs collapsed, arm bleeding, pinned to the floor, Shadow's teeth at his throat. But he didn't bite. Not this time. Shadow just stood over him, growling so low it vibrated through the tiles. By the time Graves arrived, the scene was frozen. Shadow, victorious, Briggs trembling, and everyone else went stunned. Graves looked at the blood on the floor, the broken cage door, the dog's scarred face filled with fury and pain. But all she said was, "He didn't break out to escape. He broke out to defend." She knelt beside Shadow, looked into his eyes and whispered, "What happened to you out there?" The shepherd blinked, and in that brief moment, Graves saw something that cut deeper than any wound. Grief. A pain that had no words. The pain of a soldier who'd watched too many innocents be taken and vowed never again. Later that night, as Briggs was loaded into a squad car, Graves stood beside Eli and said, "He wasn't trying to survive in that glacier. He was leading us. That dog saved her life twice, and we almost put him down." Eli nodded slowly. "And I think he's not done yet." In a quiet room at the foster home, Lila suddenly sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She whispered again, "Shadow." And somehow, miles away, in a dark corner of the shelter, the shepherd lifted his head and looked toward the door. It was raining when they came for Shadow, not because of the weather, but because something in the air felt heavier than usual. Even the sky seemed to grieve. The official order had been signed that morning. Briggs's high-priced attorney argued Shadow was a violent liability. The footage from the shelter fight had been edited, twisted, misrepresented. Suddenly, a heroic war dog was being painted as a threat. Just like that, his fate was sealed. Shadow was marked for euthanasia. Detective Graves fought it. Ranger Eli threatened to go public, but no one listened. No one cared. Only one little girl did, Lila, and she was already gone, moved to a more secure location, they said, away from the dog, for her own protection. But Graves wasn't giving up, not yet. She slammed her badge on the judge's desk. "You're wrong about him," she snapped, "and he's not dangerous, he's devoted." The judge didn't blink. "Then why did he attack a man?" Graves leaned in, eyes cold. "Because that man murdered a woman in front of her daughter. Because that man kidnapped a child. Because that dog did what none of us could, was he protected her. Don't confuse loyalty with violence." The judge didn't respond. He simply stamped the page. Red ink. Final order. Shadow's execution would take place the next morning. That night the shelter was quiet. No staff, no visitors, only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of Shadow's breathing. He didn't sleep, didn't lie down. He sat in the center of his cage, facing the door again, just like before, waiting, always waiting. But this time there was no hope in his eyes, only silence. Until a noise outside. Soft, barefoot. And then a whisper. Shadow. His ears twitched. He stood up. He knew that voice. Another whisper. "It's me." A small hand reached between the bars. Trembling, Shadow bolted toward it, gently pressed his head into the fingers. It was Lila. She'd run away. Again. Graves arrived 10 minutes later, heart racing, shoes soaked in rain. Lila stood in the center of the shelter room, arms wrapped around Shadow's neck. Neither of them moved. "Please don't take him," Lila cried. "Please, he's all I have." Graves slowly knelt beside them. She could barely speak. Her throat burned. "He's not going anywhere," she said. "Not tonight." But the order Vance was still in place, unless someone did something irreversible. Minutes later, the security alarm tripped. The main gate to the shelter was left open. By the time the backup team arrived, Shadow was gone. Tlaladuain. 2. A statewide alert was issued. Police scrambled across the county, but they were always one step too late, because Shadow wasn't running blindly. He had a plan. He was leading her, just like on the Glacier. Back then, he carried her through snow and fear. Now he carried her through rain and judgment. They reached the edge of a ravine near the northern woods, a place Holt once brought Shadow for final training. Quiet, forgotten, safe, but not for long. Police vehicles flooded the hillside. Spotlights cut through the night. Shadow turned and stood in front of Lila, shielding her again. Graves stepped out of the car and shouted, "Don't shoot, he's protecting her." But someone didn't listen. A rifle was raised, a shot rang out, time froze, and then Shadow jerked. His legs stumbled and he fell. Lila screamed. Graves ran forward faster than she ever had, pushing past the guards, sliding into the mud beside the dog. "No, no, no, stay with me," she sobbed. Shadow's eyes found Lila. He tried to lift his head, but couldn't. Blood pooled beneath him. Lila collapsed beside his body, hugging him tight. "I love you," she whispered. "Please don't go." Shadow gave a final, slow breath, and then stillness. 10 minutes later, the call came in. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, not pierced his heart. He was alive, but barely. They rushed him into emergency surgery at the local vet hospital. Graves didn't leave the room, neither did Lila. They waited, hour after hour, until finally. A light turned green above the door. He made it. The judge's order was overturned the next morning. The footage had been leaked. Public outrage erupted. Shadow wasn't a danger. He was a hero, and this time, the world saw it. The recovery took weeks. Shadow lay still most days, stitched and bandaged, IVs running from his leg, a scar stretching down his shoulder, but his eyes stayed open, watching, waiting. Lila visited every day. She would sit in the quiet corner of the recovery room drawing pictures. Most of them were of her and Shadow, running through trees, lying under stars, sitting beside her. Mother. She'd taped them to the walls around his bed, filling the white room with color, memory, and love. She never spoke much, but Shadow didn't need words. He understood every silence, every tear, every smile. When she placed her tiny hand on his paw, he moved just enough to rest his head against her wrist. That was all she needed. One morning, Graves entered the room with a folded paper in her hand and emotion in her eyes. She walked to Lila, crouched beside her and held the paper out. It was official. Adoption papers. Lila blinked slowly. Her mouth fell open. "Me and Shadow?" Graves nodded, voice tight. "He's yours now. Forever." Tears welled in Lila's eyes. She turned to Shadow and whispered, "We're going home." He didn't move much, but the slow thump of his tail on the floor said everything. They returned to the Glacier one last time. Ranger Eli guided them back to the place it all started. The frozen silence stretched across the cliffs, the same cliff where Shadow had once howled, bleeding, refusing to leave Lila's mother behind. Now, he stood there again, older, slower, but whole. He didn't howl this time, he just stood quietly, and Lila, now holding his leash, gently placed a small stone on the edge of the glacier. She'd painted it the night before. On the stone were 2 words, "For Mum." Shadow looked at it, then pressed his nose gently to the surface. Then he walked away. Years passed. Shadow grew gray around the muzzle, slower in the legs, but never in the heart. He and Lila became inseparable. Park trails, school visits, therapy centers. Wherever she went, he followed. Sometimes when she cried in the night, dreaming of that day, that gunshot, that loss, he would climb into her bed and lie against her chest. No barking, no fuss, just warmth, just presence. The final image of their story came on a spring afternoon. Lila, now taller, stronger, more radiant, sat under the same tree her mother once read stories beneath, a sketchbook in her lap, and beside her Shadow rested, eyes closed, breathing slow, his head on her leg. A soft breeze moved through the grass. Lila stopped drawing for a moment, looked down and smiled. Shadow had gone still, peaceful, silent. She didn't cry. She placed her hand on his head, leaned down and whispered, "You kept your promise." She closed her book, and the last page showed a simple drawing. A girl, a mother, and a German shepherd, standing together on the glacier beneath a sky of stars. No words were spoken after that, only silence, the kind that says everything, the kind that lingers. Forever. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that loyalty outlives even death, if you know that some heroes walk on 4 legs, then share this story. Let the world remember what true love looks like, even in silence. Drop a comment for Shadow. Type "Forever Loyal" if you believe no bond is stronger than that between a child and her dog. Subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us of the power of courage, sacrifice, and unconditional love, because sometimes the quietest stories leave the loudest echoes.